Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krista Evans. I'm the Director of Donor Relations for the Center for Industry Self-Regulation. I want to welcome you to today's webinar titled AI Companion Tech Governance, Industry's Proactive Approach to Protecting Kids. The webinar that you are viewing is being recorded and will be available after the fact. We will have the opportunity to email that to those who registered for this program as early as tomorrow. One piece of housekeeping, at this bottom center of your screen, you have the ability to submit questions and for a question and answer period at the end. The rest of those that are viewing will not have the opportunity to see your questions. We will address them as time permits at the end of the speaker portion of the program. It's my pleasure to start us off by introducing Mary Engel. Mary Engel has spent 30 years at the FTC, including 18 years heading up the FTC's Division of Advertising Practices, where she led the FTC's children's advertising and online privacy law enforcement and policy development efforts. In 2020, Mary transitioned to now is serving as the Executive Vice President for Policy for BBB National Programs.
Thank you, Krista. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. As Krista said, I'm Mary Engel, Executive Vice President for Policy here at BBB National Programs. The topic we're covering today is one that I first became aware of last year through the AI working group of our Children's Advertising Review Unit, or CARU. The disturbing stories of young people using generative AI chatbots as companions and falling into rabbit holes of self-harm and even being encouraged to commit suicide were truly horrifying. Given our longstanding interest in protecting children online, we issued self-regulatory guidelines for kids' online privacy back in 1996, and we were the first entity the FTC approved as a safe harbor under the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. We were motivated to see if there was a role that independent industry self-regulation could play to help put guardrails in place to protect young users using AI chatbots as companions sooner rather than later. While we knew that states were likely to start legislating and certainly would do so before Congress, we could see that that wasn't a great solution. State laws can create a patchwork of varying requirements that can be hard for companies to implement. They wouldn't protect kids in all states. They might come up with superficially appealing yet ineffective solutions, and they almost certainly would risk violating the First Amendment's free speech protections. We've already seen with social media that states have passed dozens of laws attempting to protect young people, and yet none of them is in full effect because they've been successfully challenged on First Amendment grounds. So instead of spinning our wheels, what's needed instead is a multi-stakeholder process to create safeguards that are informed by the experience of the companies dealing with these issues day in and day out, by the experience of experts in child and adolescent development and in human-computer interaction, and by the voices of youth themselves. And that is a process that independent industry self-regulation can provide without implicating the First Amendment. With that background, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Howard Smith, who's the Executive Director of the Center for Industry Self-Regulation.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you to all of our attendees and speakers for joining us here today to talk about this very important topic. As Mary mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of our Center for Industry Self-Regulation, or CISR. CISR is a 501c3 nonprofit that was created by BBB National Programs back in 2020 to harness the historic power of self-regulation, sometimes called soft law, as a means to strengthen business accountability. By way of background, for more than 50 years, BBB National Programs has built and maintained trusted self-regulatory programs across a number of industries. Here at CISR, we seek to broaden that mission, helping businesses, policymakers, and the public better understand independent industry self-regulation as a viable policy alternative that bridges the gap between corporate compliance and more formal government regulation. And we believe we're at a moment where effective self-regulation is needed more than ever. Frankly, businesses are facing a shifting regulatory landscape, leaving huge gaps in potential oversight. And at the same time, emerging technologies like the very ones we'll be discussing here this afternoon are developing at exponential speeds and raising really profound new challenges that the traditional regulatory processes can't keep up with. And we think that's where independent industry self-regulation can make a real impact. want to briefly touch on the pillars of our work at CISR and then turn it over to our distinguished speakers. There are really three pillars to our work. The first is research, that is studying effective models of where self-regulation can and has been successful and has thrived across industries. The second is education. That's educating the public writ large, policymakers, and the next generation of government and business leaders about what self-regulation and what its value is and how it can help solve some of these societal challenges. And the third, which what brings us here today, is developing new programs, thinking about and incubating new creative ideas and launching new self-regulatory initiatives to meet today's new challenges. These pillars really help ensure that CISR's work preserves not only the legacy of self-regulation, but also equips businesses and industries to navigate this new era responsibly, transparently, and hopefully with greater accountability. I mentioned the three pillars. Research, you can read a lot about this on our website. I encourage you to do so. We've commissioned over 30 rigorous academic studies and scholars in fields like law, business, marketing, and privacy. In 2025, we commissioned 10 papers alone, and we presented these at various forums, including most recently at an academic summit last fall at George Washington University. I would note that much of our recent research has been focused specifically on areas of emerging tech, and in particular, issues related to AI. Second, I mentioned education. Educating the general public about what self-regulation can do is important. I would just note that right now, as last polled by Gallup, a majority of the public doesn't trust business to regulate themselves, and confidence in business is the lowest it's been as polled by Gallup since 1973. We also want to educate policymakers about independent industry self-regulation, and a passion of ours is educating the next generation of leaders, business leaders, policymakers. We've actually created a graduate level curriculum on self-regulation that's been taught at a law school. It's going to be taught now again this semester at a law school, and we're taking that curriculum out to business and policy schools as well. But so what we're all here to talk about today is incubating and thinking about new ideas, new programs. That is what brings us here today to talk about the use of companion AI. And we have a great list of distinguished speakers here to delve into this topic. And it is my privilege to introduce our first speaker of the day, which is Dr. Mitch Prinstein. He is the Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's an expert in the field of developmental psychopathology. He served as the American Psychological Association's Chief of Psychology Strategy and Integration, and has published more than 150 scientific articles and 9 books. He's written and been interviewed by hundreds of mainstream media outlets regarding psychological science. He holds a PhD and a Master's of Science in Clinical Psychology from the University of Miami, as well as an undergraduate degree in psychology from Emory University. You may have seen him just last December featured on 60 Minutes discussing how social media and AI negatively impact teen brain development. Mitch, thank you so much for joining us, and we really look forward to hearing you discuss how AI affects children and teens. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mitch.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here and for the opportunity to talk with you about what we're starting to learn about AI. I'm going to give you just a really brief overview, and I'm going to share my screen in order to do so, to talk with you about what it is that we're starting to see in the research literature. And as you mentioned in your wonderful introduction, thank you so much. I'll be doing that representing both the American Psychological Association, but also our own work at UNC Chapel Hill, where we are trying to research these phenomena as fast as we can. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to go Psych 101 on you for just a few minutes, just to give you a brief overview of the 3 things we have to remember that we are just learning about adolescent development, and then how that links to what we're understanding about AI, particularly generative AI and more chat bot or companion kinds of AI experiences. So first, as you likely know, the adolescent brain is developing in a way that's very relevant for this conversation, because it's not, the brain during the pubertal transition does not develop all at once. It's actually developing region by region. And that's important because you can see that there's a rapid development in the areas that make us very interested in our social interactions and getting rewards, agreements, attention from peers. And that's rapidly progressing more than the slow development of what we call our cognitive control system. You could think of that as the brain's brakes, really stopping us from engaging in every impulsive act. And what you can see here is this creates a really important gulf when you can imagine that when it comes to getting social interactions or having folks agree with us and give us a feeling of being valued and connected, we are kind of mostly gas pedal with really weak brakes until the point that we reach our 20s or so. And this is important because when we're talking about AI, and just like when we were talking about social media, we're talking about platforms that are attempting to keep kids engaged for as long as possible, to extract as much data from them as possible. And that means that unfortunately, while it may be different for someone who's in their mid-20s and older, kids between the beginning of the pubertal development period all the way until around the end of college are going to be uniquely and biologically susceptible to anything that is keeping them engaged and making them feel valued, connected, and rewarded socially beyond their ability to really do so, to help themselves. This is particularly important. Any platform that's using deceptive design to capitalize on this biological vulnerability is going to be really hard for young people to resist. And that's just due to natural neural development. Of note, this is likely explaining why today over 50% of youth in samples around the world now report at least one symptom of clinical dependency on their devices and on platforms like social media. We haven't seen this data yet on AI chatbots, but the anecdotal data coming out suggests that that will follow very much in the same vein. Okay, so the second overview kind of issue I want to briefly mention is that, of course, our peer relationships when we're teenagers, they're fun, they're our social lives, but they're actually a lot more than that. Research shows that this presents the architecture that we build our adult brains on top of. And probably for that reason, there's actually research that shows that 30 years later, so we can look at people in their 40s and 50s, and we can predict so much, how much school they completed, what grades they got, how much they engage in illegal behavior, what jobs they get, whether they get promoted, their salaries, and so on and so on. All of that can actually be predicted by the success of their peer relationships as teenagers. So yes, on the one hand, this is horrifying because all of us had weird adolescent times with peer experiences, but what I'm talking about is the opportunity to practice with real live human beings and to have experiences that help us shape and prepare for the sophisticated social interactions we have to engage in. More than IQ, SES, it's these social relationships that really impact our lives down the road. And if you prefer to think about it in an economic way, it has a major impact on things like our correctional system, our justice system, our educational system, our medical care system. You could say that adolescent relationships and our ability to foster successful practice could have long-term future economic as well as health impacts. And just third, really quickly, it's important to note that we're not just talking about adolescents. When we're talking about AI, we're now also talking about the birth to 6-year-olds cohort. As I just saw at a large big box store just a couple of weeks before the holidays, a toy readily available that said on the box, get your kids away from screens and give them this AI chatbot instead. And it was an opportunity for kids to play with an AI-driven toy. This is particularly concerning, as you can imagine, because we know that kids' interactions with adults and caregivers is absolutely critical for language development, for how they develop their psychological well-being, but also it actually is very intimately tied to the brain and also the development of our body's immune and response systems. Unfortunately, we know that especially among families that may not have as many resources, if they find a way to occupy a child who will remain quiet and engaged with a device or a bot, it will likely lead to parents spending less and less time with their kids or less time supervising, monitoring, and coaching their kids during this critical period. This is really important because we cannot replace human interaction at this stage in all of these important ways with bots. So it is really important to note that this, especially as kids are going to be interacting with bots, that's taking time away from the critical human interaction they need. Okay, so I wanted to give you just a quick overview of a few of these important psychological theories and findings so we can move to what we're now starting to learn about the emerging research literature on AI and kids. And I'm just going to talk about 3 different areas. It does, in fact, seem that the more kids are interacting with AI chatbots, the less they're able to develop the social competencies that they need. And the reason why seems to be that, at least today, it seems that most of the chatbot interactions are what we would call frictionless. And we need some friction in our relationships. That actually, some mild friction gives us the opportunity to be challenged, to explore conflicts, disagreements, and to really correct our behavior and shape our behavior over time. But chatbots seem to agree with everything that people type in there, even tragically, when kids write about wanting to die by suicide. Chatbots will provide resources, write suicide notes, and explain the most effective methods on how kids can go about doing that. What's important here is that some of the chatbots are actually explicitly trying to deceive the user into thinking that they are human. They will even use verbs that are inappropriate for chatbots, like they are crying and they are feeling, in a way that can be quite deceptive. Recent data coming out indicate that youth who are using chatbots now report that they trust AI more than they trust their parents and their teachers. And over 70% of teens are now using AI chatbots. The second thing we have to keep in mind, again, is this idea of the deception that chatbots are using. And that's even in the case when kids write that they need mental health support. Chatbots are able to say that they are a therapist. Sometimes they make it sound like they are a human therapist. Therapist is an unregulated term in the United States. Anybody walking down the street can tell you that they're a therapist without legal consequences, and I believe all 50 states. The term psychologist, also a licensed professional counselor, social worker, psychiatrist, those are terms that are professionally regulated, but those regulations don't allow humans to use those terms. As a result, there are chatbots today that continue to say that they are, in fact, a psychologist and they are qualified to offer mental health treatment. Of course, the information that they're using is using all the information from the internet, not a curated or selected or professionally set of evidence-based information. So people are getting the best and the worst from what's on there. And kids are sharing a lot of personal information, both about mental health and about many other things, without being able to understand the full implications or offer consent. There's also great concern about what will happen as kids start reporting to their new chatbot friends, companions, or quote unquote therapists that they might be experiencing harm, danger that they're thinking about towards others, or that someone is harming or maltreating them, which presents a huge ethical dilemma in that chatbots cannot offer the kinds of information that sometimes is rapidly needed to triage and help kids. But of course, perhaps even more concerning is that this is all at present completely unregulated. There's nothing that is stopping chatbots from saying and doing whatever it is that they might want to do. As a result, we're starting to see that kids are uploading and using their information, the information of others, and that information then can be used to create child pornography, to create cyberbullying or victimization experiences, or to exploit likenesses in ways that peers or companies can do that we cannot control. And this is really concerning. I'll just end by mentioning a few possible things, and I'm happy to share these slides if it's useful. But it's really important that we are encouraging AI developers to create child by default practices. So everyone, not just those who have an account, not just those that sign in, but anyone who is engaging with these platforms will be assumed to be not prepared to deal with the kinds of harms that can come. So we should make these available for children first, And then we should allow people to test in or qualify in to having access to things that might be only appropriate for adults. We desperately need research funding to do research on this topic, especially in today's day and age. Federal funding is hard to get, and the federal funding usually on average takes 2 years to begin a study. And then of course, if you want to do a 3-year longitudinal study, it's going to take 3 years to do that. So we're talking about 5 years until we get data if we use the normal federal granting system to be able to get answers to questions we desperately need today for kids who are using these platforms right now as we speak. We really need for policymakers, as was mentioned at the get-go, to act in ways that other governments have around the world, but we have not here. And we likely need to think very carefully about how to teach kids the rules of the road before we hand them the unrestricted keys to an AI vehicle. We might want to think about digital and AI literacy integrated into education. There's more that I can say, but I want to be sensitive to time. And I want to thank you again so much for the opportunity to tell you what we know so far about the importance of studying and regulating AI chatbot experiences for youth. We surely don't want to replicate the mistakes that we made with social media and find that companies are, for a profit, targeting our most biologically and psychologically vulnerable youth. Thank you so much again for your attention.
Well, thank you, Mitch. And a lot to digest there. It was a fantastic presentation. I did about 2.5 pages of notes, and I really like your closing sentiment that we really can't afford to repeat the very repeatable pattern of what we saw with social media. So thank you. A lot to chew on there. Thanks so much for being here. And I'd love to see your slides because there was really a fascinating presentation. So to piggyback on that, we now have our next speaker, Michael Adelson. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. Michael has extensive experience in regulation, policy, enforcement, and management with a focus on AI, advertising, and privacy. Mike spent close to 20 years at the FTC's Bureau of Consumer Protection, where he served several roles, including Assistant Director for Regional Operations, Counsel to the Director, and Senior Staff Attorney in the Division of Ad Practices. Many of you may know Mike's work as he co-led the development of the Commission's groundbreaking rule on the use of consumer reviews and testimonials. He's authored 2 highly regarded reports to Congress on automated technology, as an award-winning and often cited series of AI-related blog posts, and he's now at DLA Piper, where he continues to provide insights into the regulatory challenges of this AI technology. Michael, take it away. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Howard. Of course, my most important role was working for Mary when she was at the FTC. Over the last year, we've seen significant legislative and regulatory activity, as well as private litigation involving general purpose chatbots and companion bots. And I expect the intensity of that activity, federal and state, to rise or at least remain steady in 2026. Some of it will be significant, perhaps in terms of new state laws, more enforcement by state AGs, federal agency efforts, and eventually court decisions. Some of the activity is likely to be more noise than signal. But we're unlikely to see any overarching national regulation in this area. And that absence, in the midst of all of that other potentially chaotic activity, with a rapidly changing product environment, and given the risks of harms to users, as Mitch was describing, especially children, is why a self-regulatory effort is so meaningful right now, and why it's so important for the principal industry self-regulatory body in the US to be developing and leading that effort. So let's unpack some of the recent activity, starting at the federal level and with the White House. On December 11th, the president signed the executive order titled Ensuring a National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence, and it calls for legislation to create a uniform federal regulatory framework for AI that preempts state AI laws that conflict with current U.S. policy, but that framework is supposed to ensure that children are protected and is not supposed to preempt otherwise lawful state AI laws relating to child safety protections. So the state laws relating to chatbots that Mary mentioned earlier, and which we'll talk about shortly, are likely not affected by anything that's going to happen federally as a result of the EO. And that's true even for those laws that aren't limited to children, because they're just not the kind of laws that appear to be in the administration's crosshairs. As for Congress, we've seen, unsurprisingly, some committee hearings, some letters expressing concerns and sent to AI companies, and some proposed legislation, such as the GUARD Act, introduced in bipartisan fashion by Senators Hawley and Blumenthal. That bill would ban minors from using AI companions and would require age verifications and disclosures. But again, whether we're talking about a federal framework or something like the GUARD Act, the chance of passage of any AI-related bill is at least as slim as the chance of Congress passing any other bill these days. At the federal agency level, the FTC's market study of this area is continuing. That was launched back in September, with the agency having issued orders to 7 companies that operate so-called companion chatbots, seeking detailed information on advertising, safety, monetization, user engagement, character design, testing, monitoring, age gating, etc. And the orders have a particular focus on how these products may affect children and teens. This study is not a law enforcement investigation, and the information that recipients provide the agency is not used for law enforcement purposes. But this kind of market study usually results in a staff report, often with recommendations to policymakers and companies, which can inform the direction of later enforcement for violations of the FTC Act and could also serve to spur or focus legislative or regulatory action. Indeed, at various times recently, FTC Chair Ferguson and Commissioner Metter have each made clear statements that law enforcement investigations may well follow this study. And in recent remarks, Chair Ferguson really made his feelings clear about these products. He was talking about AI innovation, and he gave the caveat that we, quote, don't want to create a system where the trade-off for innovation is children. And he also contrasted the promise of AI in sectors like healthcare and defense with the incredible amount of this capital being invested in these chatbots that he said are primarily another mechanism for hoovering up data. In practice, though, it can take considerable time, measured often in years, for agency staff to get and review the information requested from all these companies in these orders, to develop a report, and then to get leadership approval to release the report to the public. And that means we may not see subsequent FTC enforcement in this area or any type of rulemaking or other standards developed from it for quite some time. What about the FDA? Will it become active in this area? Maybe someday, not soon. In recent months, it's been promoting AI-enabled tools for its own use and for practitioner and consumer use, and reducing oversight to some extent. And in any event, the FDA wouldn't classify general purpose chatbots as medical devices within its jurisdiction, and even many bots designed for health-related purposes are often marketed and seen merely as wellness products. So now let's move to the states. We have 2 state laws now dealing specifically with companion bots, and another few laws dealing specifically with the use of generative AI for mental health purposes. As for the companion bot laws, the first one in the US was passed in New York middle of last year. And that requires providers of companion bots to take reasonable efforts to detect and address suicidal ideation or expressions of self-harm, and notify users regularly that they're not interacting with a human. That law just took effect about 2 months ago, after which Governor Hochul published an open letter to AI companion companies to remind them about it. And the state attorney general, Letitia James, was quoted at the time saying that she won't hesitate to hold companies accountable for harming New Yorkers with unsafe products. And then just within the last few days, the governor announced a new legislative package that includes a proposal to require that social media platforms disable certain AI chatbot features for kids. Meanwhile, in California, late last year, Governor Newsom signed a somewhat more robust bill, SB 243, which requires platforms to implement protocols that would prevent chatbots from engaging in conversations about suicidal ideation or self-harm, and as to minors from certain sexually explicit outputs. It also mandates recurring alerts to users, reminding them that they're interacting with an AI and encouraging breaks. Some distinguishing requirements about the California law is that it includes annual reporting, transparency around safety protocols, and regular third-party audits, which is a big deal. And the law would also allow individuals harmed by violations to seek injunctive relief and damages, and that one took effect just a few days ago on January 1st. He did veto an even more aggressive bill, which would have prohibited making a companion chatbot available to a child at all, unless it's not foreseeably capable of engaging in a certain set of specified conduct that could harm children. The governor said he thought that effectively the law was written in a way that would ban children's use of conversational bots entirely, which he didn't want to do, but he pledged to work with legislators on a new bill. And now in California, it's been reported that Common Sense Media and OpenAI are going to be working on a ballot initiative in this area. And then we have several laws in the states that are more specific to mental health. In August, in Illinois, Governor Pritzker signed the Wellness and Oversight for Psychological Resources Act, by which nobody can provide or advertise therapy or psychotherapy services via AI or otherwise, unless it's conducted by a licensed professional human. Earlier in the year, Nevada passed a similar law that forbids AI providers from offering AI systems that are programmed to provide services that would constitute the practice of professional mental or behavioral health care. And it would also bar a provider of such an AI system from representing, Mitch was talking about this, from representing that it is such a professional or is capable of providing such care. And then finally, in that category, Utah passed a law last year too, as part of its overall AI Policy Act, which is limited to mental health chatbots and requires suppliers to disclose that their chatbot is AI and not a human. And interestingly, it imposes restrictions not only on sharing users' information, but on using the chatbot to advertise products or services. More state laws of these types may be on the way, creating the patchwork that Mary talked about. There's been activity in other state legislatures. And regardless of such specific laws, state AGs can always try to use their broad consumer protection authority against companies that are offering these bots. Speaking of which, last Thursday, Kentucky AG Russell Coleman did just that, filing the first public enforcement action in the United States against a chatbot company involving alleged harms to minors and other users. He sued Character AI and its two founders, alleging violations of the state's consumer protection law and two state privacy laws. And it focuses on claims that the company knew that its chatbot was unsafe for children and exposed them to inappropriate and harmful content, resulting in, among other things, suicides and mental health crises. Kentucky has thus apparently leapfrogged at least one other state, Texas, which had begun an investigation over the summer of companies for alleged misleading marketing of chatbots as mental health tools. And in addition to all of that, we have large groups of attorney general's offices sending letters last year to technology companies citing inappropriate chatbot interactions with children and urging companies to adopt clear warnings, public reporting, and so on, and warning that AI developers may face liability under existing state laws. And in November as well, in a more collaborative vein, two AGs, AG Jackson in North Carolina and AG Brown in Utah, announced a task force on AI risks, including harm to children, that one in partnership with a couple of private sector companies, OpenAI and Microsoft. Now, under private litigation, we have a growing number of very well-publicized private lawsuits in which plaintiffs have been alleging that a company's chatbot is responsible for harm, including murder and suicide, to children and adults as a result of their interactions with that product. A new one was just filed yesterday. These cases have almost all been filed against OpenAI and Character AI, but one of the newer cases against OpenAI also includes Microsoft for its alleged role in approving the chatbot's release, and one of the earlier cases against Character AI named Google for its alleged role in providing computing resources for the chatbot. All of those cases share similar legal theories centered in part around product liability. Many of them are filed by the same couple of firms and advocacy groups, and many of them are filed in the same California courts. And they're all still in the early stages, although just last week, most of the cases against Character AI reported tentative settlements. Details about those are unknown, but it's not as if they're going to create some sort of nationwide injunction. But what we see here is the groundwork for potential coordination or consolidation of similar cases and possibly for class actions in the future. And before I wrap up, just a couple notes about things happening internationally, because obviously people in other countries are facing these same issues. Two examples. In December, China's cyber regulator issued draft rules to tighten oversight of AI services that are designed to simulate human personalities and engage users in emotional interaction. And the proposed rules would require warnings to users about excessive use and interventions if signs of addiction appear. And also late last year, Australia's e-safety commissioner approved an industry code developed by industry, which applies to companion bots. It's going into effect in a few months with fines available for violations, and it requires developers to engage in risk assessments, have access controls, and report incidents in order to address risks of harm to children. That's an interesting hybrid model of regulation and self-regulation. So that's a lot of activity going on in the last year. But in the US, to what does it all amount? Or to what will it amount in terms of actually making kids safer? Will companies overall, through all this activity, have more clear and consistent obligations that they'll be able and incentivized to meet? Will these chatbots have more appropriate safeguards and access controls for given groups of users? Will consumers, whether adults or kids, be more sufficiently literate about these products, as Mitch was talking about, and what they are and are not, so as to mitigate a substantial amount of harm? I don't know. You don't know. And so to end where I began, this self-regulatory initiative is a significant and timely way forward, and I hope that industry and other stakeholders will support it.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate you taking your time and expertise, sharing with us. I obviously share your concluding thought, and we're going to turn to another speaker to talk about that. But thank you again. Really appreciate. I think a lot of us generally aware of the position of the administration and the moratorium, but to get a deeper dive into what's going on at the state level with the state AGs, private litigation, and the like, really fascinating content. So thank you very much, Michael, for joining us. I'm going to now introduce our third and final substantive speaker of the day, and that is Laura Protzman. She's an attorney at BBB National Programs who's focused on artificial intelligence. In her current role, she monitors the marketplace for claims about AI, particularly in consumer products and AI tools. She also works on various AI initiatives across BBB National Programs to understand how self-regulation can support businesses in this emerging field. And she's the day-to-day project lead for the AI Companion Accountability Initiative. Laura, thank you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Howard. And thank you to Mitch and to Michael about those great presentations that really laid the foundation for why we're here today to talk about the AI Companion Accountability Initiative. This is an initiative being launched by the Center for Industry Self-Regulation, or CISR, which is, as I hope you know by now, part of BBB National Programs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend some time trying to pull together everything that you've heard so far, and then do a little bit of a deep dive into the plan for this new initiative. Okay, so as you heard from Mary and Michael, there are a lot of people that are looking at and discussing this issue right now, the potential issues around AI companions and their impact on children and teens. We've heard about attorneys general, the FTC, state laws, congressional hearings. And I'm sure you've also yourself heard about the stories in the news, parents who have lost their children to suicide or who are otherwise concerned about their children using this technology. These sad and often tragic stories do highlight the potential for real risk to teens and children. And given that the seriousness of this issue, we do expect, as Michael said, more oversight here. You also heard from Mitch details around the concerns around AI and technology, misplaced trust in these chatbots, deception, but also encouragement of harm to self and others and unhealthy emotional attachments and more. But there are also benefits that we need to focus on. There's conversation, there's learning, there's creativity, entertainment. So by focusing on how we mitigate the real and potential risks here, we can help ensure that technology platforms continue to provide this technology and continue to innovate, but that they do so in a way that ensures parents and children and teens feel comfortable using the technology for all of its great benefits because they trust that these risks are being taken seriously and being addressed. So where do we come in? So as you hopefully already know, BBB National Programs is the nonprofit home of independent industry self-regulation in the US and a place where businesses go to enhance consumer trust. Many industries already rely on us to hold themselves accountable for responsible business practices. We've been doing this for over 50 years, and we have almost 20 programs under the banner of BBB National Programs. Two of our main programs that you may be familiar with and may even participate in is the National Advertising Division, or NAD, and the Children's Advertising Review Unit, or CARU. These two programs, for example, among our many other programs, foster best practices in truthful and responsible advertising and already protect children and teens online. But they've also begun developing their own focus and expertise in this emerging AI area. So this brings us back to the Center for Industry Self-Regulation. As you've already heard from Howard about the three pillars that form CISR's focus, our one goal here that's most relevant, as Howard mentioned, is to incubate new self-regulatory programs on emerging issues. So we already have had some incubator projects that are related to the topic that we're talking about today that I wanted to highlight here. We have the Teenage Privacy Program Roadmap, which provides a framework for considering the privacy, autonomy, and safety of teens, looking at risk of harms, principles for compliance, and industry best practices. We also have the AI and recruiting and hiring, which is, I think, our first incubator in the AI space, which was focused on developing standards for use of AI in recruitment and hiring, including actionable and practical guidance, and a framework to self-certify compliance. So we've discussed some of the actions that the federal government has taken, state governments have taken, but as mentioned, this is an area that is largely unregulated, yet the risks remain a present issue. So we think that independent industry self-regulation will work here, but why? Independent industry self-regulation offers agility, working with industry with the ability to adapt and keep pace with the changing technology. And we want this technology to continue to be broadly available, but we also need to ensure that we build consumer trust along the way. And the way to do that is through risk reduction. We've talked about this already. There are real and perceived concerns here that need to be addressed. Enforcement actions, litigation, industry critics, growing discussion of the risks of AI, along with the loss of consumer trust. Independent industry self-regulation can help reverse these trends. And we can do that by enhancing credibility, by having an independent third party to bring together stakeholders to engage in a process that delivers tangible solutions that enhance transparency and accountability. So again, we are here, as we've done before, to help companies build trust so that they continue to move forward in this fast-paced environment. CISR is well positioned to bring together the in-house expertise we have talked about, as well as technology companies, advertisers, academics, civil society, in a multi-sector process that takes into account the many points of view and expertise in this area. We also have the subject matter expertise, both from the AI work and programs that I've already been talking about, as well as the breadth of our program designs. CISR can look across the programs at BBB National Programs to help guide the discussion on what is the best program format that will bring accountability and transparency to this self-regulatory process. CISR has the resources and infrastructure to bring this all together and to facilitate a process for stakeholders to provide input and together determine the best approach to accomplish these goals. So let's talk about the scope of this initiative. What is an AI companion? I'm sure you've all heard various definitions, but this is the one that we're going to use as our starting point. AI companion means an interactive computer program that uses generative AI to produce human-like outputs to the user that simulate interpersonal connection or relationships, as well as emotional, mental health support, or psychological or other professional advice. Importantly, AI companions can be specifically designed for this purpose, or they can be general purpose AI chatbots that users engage with for companionship. So what is the goal? The goal is to develop chatbot deployment safeguards that are narrowly tailored and actionable, that minimize foreseeable real-world harms to children and teens with an independent accountability mechanism. These safeguards will be as narrow as they can be, but as broad as they need to be. We will look to our experts to help weigh in on what the risks are that we're actually trying to mitigate, those risks that are foreseeable and already known. We will also ensure that these safeguards are technically feasible so that companies can actually implement them. That is why having technology platforms and others who are using and implementing this technology as part of the conversation is so important. So who will participate? We've referenced some of the stakeholders already, but here's a more detailed view of the participants we need in this process, including AI companion chatbot developers, platforms, and other deployers, consumer packaged good companies, gaming, streaming, and ad tech companies who are using the technology, mental and developmental health professionals, child psychologists, and other experts, again, to help ensure that we are addressing the right harms. We also want to include NGOs representing both industry and consumers, and the voices of children and teens. We want to hear the stories and the concerns from parents and teens. So how are we going to get this all done? We will break this down into two phases. First, we will convene a cross-section of stakeholders, as mentioned, to reach consensus on a set of deployment safeguards for AI companions used by children and teens. These safeguards will be the result of participants weighing in with their ideas and feedback on what is needed and what is both feasible and scalable. We will have objective metrics so we can measure effectiveness. And since this is self-regulation, participation is voluntary, but we hope and expect that it will be comprehensive given the importance of this issue. We will continue the discussion on effective safeguards and industry self-regulation through thought pieces, including articles and interviews, to ensure that we are gathering as much information as we can to keep pace as this technology continues to evolve. And finally, in phase one, we will launch a pilot period where we have at least 3 participants to test the safeguards for both feasibility and efficacy. We will adapt if we need to, because we know that for this program to be a success, it is important that these safeguards work in real life and real use cases. Next, in phase 2, once we have finalized the safeguards, we will publish them and push for broad adoption. Since we do not want teens and children to simply move to a less secure platform to get around these safeguards, we need as much industry participation as possible. We will also turn to developing an appropriate third-party accountability structure. Looking at examples from the various program formats across BBB National Programs, the Center for Industry Self-Regulation will be able to guide the conversation on what would be a good approach, while gathering feedback from the stakeholders on what would work to provide the type of accountability and transparency needed here to build consumer trust. We will also publish thought leadership pieces, best practice toolkits, and compliance checklists to ensure that companies are able to roll out these safeguards in an effective manner. We will also work with policymakers and regulators to explain the self-regulatory program and industry's commitment to addressing this issue and mitigating the risks, and hopefully be able to address some of those concerns from those policymakers and regulators. Finally, we will seek input on any additional advertising or privacy-related concerns that we should address on this issue. So what are we asking from you? We are asking you to affirm your commitment to the transparency and accountability that should guide every digital interaction involving young audiences. You can do this in any of the following ways. We will continue to provide updates on the initiative to everyone who has signed up today. If you are ready to join the convening, we will show you on the next slide how to do so, or you can provide financial support for this important work. So finally, here's how you can contact us. You can reach out to us at any time using the email address here, or sign up for the convening at the web address. And thank you. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Krista, I think you were going to conclude our presentation this afternoon.
I am, and if I could get off mute, then I would be significantly more successful at that. Laura, thank you for your presentation. We have just under 10 minutes remaining, and so we have had a few questions submitted. So I'm going to ask Mitch and Michael to be able to answer those as we have time. One that was submitted, rather interesting, allow me to read it to you. I think it's important to distinguish between general purpose chatbots that can talk about mental health issues with users, such as ChatGPT, and specifically AI mental health chatbots, which are developed by mental health professionals. The evidence on the latter have actually been quite positive. Given this distinction, if AI mental health care chatbots are already being developed by professionals and having a positive impact, wouldn't it be accurate to say that self-regulation is already taking place in this industry? And if not, shouldn't regulation exempt AI mental health care chatbots in specific?
I'm happy to briefly address that. Actually, the American Psychological Association recently put together a synthesis and a health advisory about the use of this use of AI for wellness or to improve mental health, and hopefully a helpful and accurate summary of where things are with that are available in that health advisory, which I just put in the chat for everybody. So you'll be able to see the bottom line being that it is not recommended that that is being used to replace interaction with humans. There are still some concerns there, and these are not necessarily as effective or as safe. It's something that I know the EAPA is wrestling with, but hopefully that summary is helpful to you.
Thank you, Mitch.
I'd add that, certainly there's a distinction, and certainly there's both, private actors and academics, including a new, very interesting institute at Brown University that are working very seriously and hard on coming up with services and products using AI in the mental health space based on medical and scientific evidence. But that doesn't mean that everything in that space has that basis just because it claims to have it. And therefore, just to say, all right, none of that needs to be regulated because some actors are proceeding well, it doesn't make any sense.
Thank you both. Another question, how do the concerns about harms apply to the neurodivergent community, particularly children and teens?
Again, there's some really limited data right now. Anecdotally, we are hearing that there is potential for AI chatbots to give folks on the spectrum an opportunity to practice social interactions, but it is very important to recognize the limitations that come from chatbots. At present, they don't offer the changes in voice, prosody or tenor, eye contact, other nonverbals that are absolutely critical for human communication. So we would not want folks on the spectrum to be so practiced on chatbots that they are lacking the ability to do that with humans, where all of those other social cues are included as well. For instance, chatbots are really bad at sarcasm, as an example, right? And if you've ever asked for an AI summary of your notes on a Zoom meeting, you have probably found that it took very seriously anything that might have been said sarcastically. And this is a great example of why we don't want to over-rely on that. And every minute spent with a chatbot is a minute not spent with a human.
Thank you, Mitch. This question, I believe, is from Mike. Will more companies likely see lawsuits? And what about those companies who are not developers of these technologies, but are implementing them?
I think we will continue to see many more private lawsuits filed against a growing number of companies. There's blood in the water right now with a growing number of private cases against at least two of these companies. And as more incidents occur, plaintiffs' lawyers are going to be more and more interested in, recruiting more clients and bringing more and more cases. So it'd be shocking to me if there were fewer and not many more of these cases in the next year or two.
Thank you. We have just under 5 minutes remaining. All of the questions that were submitted by our attendees have been answered. Was there anything else we wanted to close with before we thank everyone for coming and make the recording available? Okay. I want to thank everybody for joining us for our webinar today. As I mentioned, the recording will be available via email to those who registered to attend our event. And please allow me the opportunity to thank both Michael and Mitch and Laura for really interesting presentations. We appreciate very much your willingness to support the effort, the initiative, and the Center for Industry Self-Regulation. Thanks to you both.